have always been an artist. It hasn't always been clear how that would be expressed, but the impulse to create, the visions that I have, has always been a part of me. Now, early on, as a teenager, I was fascinated by comic books. And for a time, I thought I might become a comic book artist, but that fell by the wayside. However, there's a thread in there that has endured. For one thing, I realized sometime later that comic books, superhero stories, are in a very real way a modern mythology comparable to the mythology of antiquity. In fact, I have this idea that if Peter Paul Rubens was alive today, he'd be painting pictures of Superman and Batman as opposed to Hercules and Zeus. There's something going on there that's the same. There's an idea there that has endured for millennia. And we're still acting it out in a new way of storytelling. I'm also old enough to have had this experience of going into banks as a child that were imposing, impressive stone buildings, 19th century architecture. And in the lobby of the bank, high up on the walls, you could still see large painted portraits of the founders of the bank and its presidents and its boards of directors. That was still a thing when I was a child. You hardly ever see that anymore. But that made an impression on me. I remember that. Another pivotal experience from growing up to do with portraits was my family and I took a trip to Washington's Crossing. This is the event where Washington led his army across the frozen Delaware River on Christmas Eve to attack the British in New Jersey, and it was a turning point in the American Revolutionary War. And in the small museum they have at Washington's Crossing, they have a reproduction of an unfinished portrait of George Washington painted by Gilbert Stuart. And there's something about the immediacy of that portrait that stuck with me. It was electrifying in a way that I'm still paying homage to it. In fact, this portrait of Washington is a direct homage to Stuart's. And that stuck with me. Then many years later, I'd only painted a few portraits up to this point, but I got this idea of painting a portrait of my father. Now, growing up, my father was in the Navy. He was an officer. And, every boy looks up to his father, or at least he wants to, should be able to. And so the image of my father in uniform from those days was also very powerful. And so I painted this portrait of my father, and it was kind of an artistic breakthrough for me. There were things that clicked that had eluded me up to that point. Something happened. One more event, or another event, in this journey of portrait painting was, like many of you, I read Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I've read it several times. And so you may remember that in one of the chapters, Napoleon Hill talks about his imaginary board of directors. And he pictured himself sitting in a boardroom around a table with figures such as Abraham Lincoln and Mahatma Gandhi and whoever else was on his list, probably Andrew Carnegie. And what an impact that had on him and his thought process to engage in an imaginary way with these heroes of his, these people he admired, whose opinions he appreciated, whose thoughts had impressed him. And the last time I read the book, I suddenly thought, well, instead of imagining it, I'm an artist. I can paint portraits for my imaginary board of directors. And so that's what I started doing. And that's how some of these collections of historical portraits began. I started by painting my imaginary board of directors. Now that's expanded and moved on beyond that, but that's what I was doing at first. So you've probably noticed by now that heroes is kind of the through line, the conceptual idea that has endured through all these permutations and the evolution of this activity. And that's true, that's correct. And it's important because another thing that I've realized is that everyone is the hero in their own story. You are the star of your own movie, and everyone around you is just an extra. The closer you come to some people, the closer they get to being co-stars maybe, but you are still the hero of your story. Regardless of what our mothers may have said, you are literally the center of the universe, because that is the only perspective from which you experience everything. The challenge in life comes in partly because that is also the experience that everyone else is having. But again, so you are the star of your own movie. You are the hero in your own story. And I believe the world needs heroes. I believe everyone can become a hero, like embody that role to a greater and greater degree. In fact, when I paint a portrait, I always start from the same place, which is the person I am painting is a child of God. And that is because that is the greatest, grandest, most exalted frame of reference or starting point that I can imagine. So it doesn't really matter to me whether the people I paint are religious or not, or spiritual or not. They can believe anything or nothing. That's not relevant to what I'm doing. What I'm doing is trying to, as I said before, crystallize an inspiring vision of the ultimate version of you. And I can't think of anything that could possibly come above child of God. And so that's my starting point. That's my reference point. That's where I'm coming from with what I'm trying to capture in my portraits. And so that's my story. That's how I came to focus on portrait painting. The why is because, again, I believe in the greatness of people. It's not just a conceptual affectation for me when I start painting people and thinking of them as a child of God. Personally, I actually believe that. And all that implies. So there is unimaginable, unfathomable greatness within each person. We all falter and fail to live up to it. But my belief is that if I can capture a vision, even an imperfect vision of that potential, and a person lives with a portrait that depicts that kind of potential, then it improves the possibility that they may grow into that potential, even just a little bit at a time. And that's what I'm trying to call forth. That's what I'm trying to help people achieve. And so that's the why I do what I do. And that's why I do it through portraits, because it's so personal. It's you. And it's more than you. It's the elevated version of you. It's the ultimate version of you. So there you have it. For what it's worth, that's my story. That's what I do. And that's why I do it.